This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. Been pondering this a bit lately. The idea that when we're babies, I know this is very simplistic, but the idea that when we're babies, we are totally dependent upon those that are charged with our care. Hopefully, a good set of parents. They watch after all of our needs. And I know that this is kind of an old, an old trope, perhaps. But, at some point in time, the baby becomes the parent, and the parent almost reverts back to an infant-like state where they are dependent upon their children. They've lived a full life, but now the world that they live in is a world that becomes sometimes unfamiliar. It makes us very vulnerable, doesn't it? Today, I want to talk about a victim who I think arguably led what would be considered by most an incredible, remarkable life. We're going to talk about the death, the alleged murder of a lady who was 81 years old, living in a care home in Virginia. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, I've been on vacation recently, and I know you told me not to, but I looked at the news. I read an article. I was not supposed to. I know I wasn't supposed to, but I did it anyway. So I hope you can find it within your heart to forgive me.
Yeah, I understand.
And the reason I happened to pick up on this, and only you would appreciate this about me, because you know how cracked my worldview is, my lens is. It caught my eye because it was an article about what's being framed as a suicide capsule. And when I say suicide capsule, I'm not talking about like something that's hidden in the tooth of a spy, in one of these movies where they pop the tooth out and they can take the sign. No, this is a suicide capsule. And this article was about this thing that has been developed in Switzerland, where you can self-euthanize. And I was thinking, and this is not necessarily for people that have run out their life as far as age. Mm-hmm. They haven't aged out. It's a matter of them making a choice to end their life in this thing that looks like something off of Star Trek. As a matter of fact, it looks exactly, if Star Trek nerds are out there, it looks exactly like, what was it? The Search for Spock, that edition of the Stars. Yeah. I think where they shoot his casket out of
that's at the end of Wrath of Khan. It's at the end of it when Kirk says, "More human," when he can't. They're playing the bagpipes. You got Scotty doing it. They're playing the bagpipes,
There you go.
Yeah.
And they blast him off, into this thing, that begins to orbit this planet. That's what this thing looked like.
Okay.
To me, it did, at least.
All right, a suicide capsule. Okay.
Yeah, and so it's kind of bizarre. And I don't know. I have to ask, are those people quitting on life? Is that what it is? And I know that that's controversial. People have a choice. We're creatures of free will. You can do what you want with your life.
Yeah.
But I look at at the topic today, I hate to say topic, that's so cold, but this woman who has arguably led a very, very full life, and it comes to an end apparently on the floor of a care home at the hands of family members.
Maybe. Because, again, you mentioned it, and I'm glad you did. You said the alleged, okay? Here's what we have. We have Cleo Loizides, who is 81 years old. She's in, it isn't necessarily called a nursing home anymore. You mentioned care facility. The thing is, it's like the waiting room for heaven. That's pretty much where we are when you've got people in this home. But it is an assisted care because Cleo Loizides was seen around 5 o'clock that afternoon. She was walking in the hallway, was grabbing something to eat, and was heading back to her room. So she's up, taking care of herself, doing her own thing. A couple hours later, as they're, just before midnight checking the rooms, an orderly goes into the room and finds Cleo cold to the touch and a bit rigid. So you've got a 4.5, 5 hour, 6 hour period of time here that we're dealing with where something happened. When somebody dies in a care facility like this, do they call the police? Do they call EMS? Who do they call? Because it ain't Ghostbusters. I'm just curious.
Because it's variable dependent upon what the law requires in any particular state. And kind of let me break it down, just give me a little latitude here, because it's kind of interesting. Most people don't understand this.
Well, people are cold and stiff when they die, right? Isn't that what, after I die, if I was to die right here today in this room while we're doing the show, I pass away and nobody finds me for 2 hours. By the time 2 hours is up, I'm going to be stiff, right?
Yes, some rigidity would have begun to present at that point.
And I would be I would be room temperature. I would not be warm.
You would be cooler. You would not have attained room temperature by that time. That would take about 12 hours.
Okay.
For every bit of the energy to bleed off of your body. When I say bleed, I'm not talking about blood flow. I'm talking about just bleeding off that internalized heat that has been created in life.
Okay.
But here's the problem in care facilities, and I notice how they've softened these terms. It's like everything else in life. This is like a care facility. They don't use the term nursing home. When I was a kid, they still used the term retirement home.
Oh, wow.
That you had retirement home, nursing home. Nursing home implies that you're in need of care constantly. And many people are that show up. But now the way they have these things structured is that if you'll imagine a model of like a molecule where you have the core, the nucleus, you might have that nucleus within that environment that requires some type of intensive monitoring, not intensive care, but you might have people that have dementia. They'll have a separate dementia wing. They'll have people that have major medical problems like kidney failure, all those sorts of things. They're not going to be hospitalized. They're going to go to a care facility. And then extending out from that, it goes all the way from where you're still doing bed checks to people that actually have these condominium-like structures on the property that are just merely adjacent to the more intensive area. So it's almost like this ring within a ring within a ring. I've been to a couple of these over the years.
Okay, so basically you would have those who are very self-sufficient, but living in an area where they can be a part of life with other people checking on them and still cooking for themselves and taking care of their area.
And they
all the way.
Literally, they haven't had the keys taken away from them.
Right.
I mean, you still have folks that live in these places that still have their car. They go to church. They go to the grocery store and all of that stuff. But there's people there in case they need something.
Right. Okay. And it goes from that all the way down to somebody who actually is getting a lot of care during the day.
Exactly. Okay. So it's not one size fits all. Yeah. And I think the skill level of the people that work there is going to be variable, because you're not going to have, if you've got somebody that's got like some kind of, I hate to say terminal illness, because I don't know that hospice would attend to them in this environment. where they're providing what's called palliative care. For folks that don't know what palliative care is, that's end of life care.
Okay.
They're just trying to make, you've heard people say, we just want to make them comfortable. And that means that they apply meds to them and all these sorts of things. But yeah, it is, the old term God's waiting room. It's one of those places where you try to live out a life where you can't necessarily do everything that you want to do. Hey, some people choose to go there because within their circle, within their age group, they're diminished. They don't have a lot of interaction. And they say that, if you can continue interaction with other people, that extends your life. It extends your brain health, all that stuff. So if you want to play cards or hang out, do needlepoint with people that are your age. I can tell you at this point in my life, I love my college students, but I ain't got nothing in common with them at all, other than we're occupying the same space. Yeah. If we're going to talk about our music, the music that I love and that you love, they're not really going to get it, that sort of thing. And sometimes it can come down to that. But in a case like this, she's what is referred to as ambulatory, because you said something key just a second ago, that she had gotten up and was walking the halls. But, back to your other point about what's reportable and what's not, and this is kind of an interesting story. When I first started as an investigator with the coroner's office, and this happened to me twice, nursing home deaths were not reportable to the coroner. These people would die. The death was kind of expected. They were under the direct, because this is the thing about it, and this always kind of bothers me. They claim that if you are a resident of a nursing facility, that you are constantly being seen by a physician. That's untrue. Right. They have nurses there, and they have what's referred to most of the time as a medical director, and they're the doctor. And that doctor will sign the death certificate, but they're not going to have necessarily intimate knowledge. They're not going to be doing an exam on this person every single day. And so they'll have to sign the death certificate. Do they know enough about the medical history to sign it? Well, they have the medical history, and they can put out, an idea that, it was probably cardiac arrest. Everybody, by the way, dies of cardiac arrest.
Right. Your heart stops
even if
beating.
you get your head cut off.
Right.
It's kind of a weasel thing to say on a death certificate. I've always had a problem with that. But you go from that, and there's some kind of underlying disease, and that person would be tasked with signing the death certificate. But it doesn't mean that the coroner is going to be notified. This is when it changed. When I was in New Orleans, even in the late 80s, early 90s, we started seeing cases of elder abuse.
Oh, okay.
And these cases were not reported. And the abuse could come from staff members, it could come from neglect by staff members, or it could come from family members. And all of a sudden, the coroner put out a mandate that these cases from now on, every nursing home death will be reported to the coroner. They have to call us. Wow. And we can make a decision at that time if we're going to roll out and take a look at the body. Now, that can get a bit tedious, particularly if you've only got a staff of 3 investigators and you got all these other cases. Well, that happened, and I'll be doggone, the same thing happened to me in Atlanta. When I got to Atlanta, to the medical examiner, nursing home cases were not reportable. They weren't. Neither are hospice cases, by the way. Hospice nurse handles everything, and God bless those people. I don't know how they do that job, but they do in-home care, palliative care, like I mentioned. But we started seeing a spike in elder abuse. And so the medical examiner said, okay, from now on, all these nursing home deaths, they're going to be reported to the ME. The problem is that logistically it becomes a real lift. It becomes a real lift for the staff of the ME. It becomes a real lift to, if you want to go out and visit the scene, because you're disrupting the environment out there and you have an expectation that people are going to die. Dave, do you know who winds up reporting? This is going to blow you away, what I'm about to say. Yeah. You know who winds up reporting to the medical examiner or coroner many times with these care facility deaths, who actually brings it to our attention? Funeral directors, because they will get the body, they pick it up, and then they put the body on the table at the funeral home and getting ready to prep. And all of a sudden, the funeral director / mortician, I never can tell what they prefer to be called, but they're prepping the body. And all of a sudden, they look at the body and they're like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. I've got bruises all over the body. I've got, marks on the neck. And it's hard to delineate that. Norm Macdonald, who passed away, right. I guess it was last year or 2 years ago. I can't remember, the comedian. I'm watching the program that Jerry Seinfeld had, the Riding in Cars.
Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee.
Yeah. And Norm Macdonald tells the story of his grandmother. And he says he went to visit his grandma, and he said that grandma had a bruise from her wrist all the way up to her shoulder. It was purple. And Jerry's mouth is like wide open. And he says, what happened? And Norm Macdonald, in typical Norm Macdonald fashion, looks at him and says, oh, Grandma, I asked her, I said, how'd you get that bruise? And she said, the wind. And so, there are certain manifestations on the elderly's body that you expect. You bruise easily. You can abrade skin. It peels back really easy. Yeah. Skin is dehydrated. It's like parchment.
Yep.
So I don't know. I think
that's how my mother-in-law was.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. When you said that, I didn't realize that was a thing. But as she got older, that her skin it was very thin, or it seemed very thin. And it would peel back. Like she would have a little scratch, but it would like push the skin. And
it does. And those things can get infected. And the thing about it is the skin itself it's got almost a translucent quality to it, as opposed to, because, you're losing, as we get older, we actually lose that layer of fat. That's very important for us. You're greatly diminished. Your nutrition is changing. Your nutritional needs are changing. Right. And so it's hard to say, look, we can't fight. You cannot fight time.
Right.
You can buy things off of TV and they're going to tell you, that this is going to add another minute to your life. But, let's face it, Keith Richards is still alive, and Richard Simmons is now deceased. Just keep that in mind. So not one size does not fit all, and we're eventually going to succumb. But in this particular case, there's more to this, and it's something that is going to require more of a forensic eye on it to get the clarity that's required.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Dave, when we cover cases of child abuse, I'm speaking for myself. I know I can pretty much testify that it happens with you as well. Our blood boils to a man with these cases. It's infuriating. You feel helpless. I've always said, with Kim and I, it's like, don't kill a child. Just bring them to my home, and no questions asked. We'll find a place for them. Don't destroy a child. But something that doesn't get a lot of attention out there, Dave, is elder abuse, and it does happen. And I've worked cases, and it is some of the most horrific stuff that goes on that really kind of flies under the radar. And I'm really wondering about, I'm wondering about the familial history with this case, because that's something that we would really dig into as investigators in a case like this, Dave.
the shocking part about all of this story is the family. And when we have a story, oftentimes I look at the obituary. I want to know more about the person we're talking about, because when you deal with crimes, murders, and things like that, after a while, it becomes a story. And it's not a story. It's a person. And it's a person that people cared about and loved who is no longer here because of someone else. And in this particular case, looking at the life of 81-year-old Cleo Loizides, she had a career at a time when women didn't usually do careers in that age group. Again, she's 81, so at her death. And I was looking at where she was a model in the 60s, and she went into banking. She was spending her time in North Carolina, Eastern North Carolina, more than anything else. And it was where she met her husband that caught my attention, Joe. Because, because again, being a model in the 60s is an interesting thing because of the women's movement that began. Remember, there was a time in the late 60s and early 70s where it was almost like, don't wear makeup, don't be you're not you're a woman, you're a person, you're not a thing, you're not a play toy or whatever. Anyway,
Right.
And she was her own person, modeling in the 60s and then going into banking in the 70s. And she met her husband as a volunteer at a community theater. So she had some performance thing going on there, that's where I attached the modeling career. Now you're in community theater, which is where she meets her future husband. And he also is volunteering, and he worked at a TV station. So they were like, when you actually look behind you,
is this like in the Norfolk area?
Yeah, it's in Eastern North Carolina. Eastern North Carolina and Virginia. When you go from Norfolk, Newport News, you got a huge military base, huge Navy base in Norfolk.
Yeah.
And Norfolk, Newport News, all of that area. And then as you come down the coast a little bit in Eastern North Carolina, like Elizabeth City, and then you go into the Outer Banks. I kind of look at all that geography as the same general vicinity. And there's a lot of, it appears that that's where she spent a lot of her time. That's where, because her husband worked in a TV station in Norfolk.
Okay.
Anyway, so she has a daughter, and it's, again, a normal life, a very normal life. When her husband passes away, they're doing okay, obviously. I say obviously, but I guess maybe it's not obvious, but, she goes into this facility, and I don't know why she ended up there, at this care facility, except that her daughter had moved away and was living in Indiana. Her husband passes away, and so she doesn't really have, blood family there.
Right. Yeah.
And all I could think of was maybe because she was active in her early 80s. And I only note that because of her last day on Earth, where she was, walking the hallways and getting her own food and stuff. That's the only sign we have of how active she was, because if she was not active, if her health was not good, the remark wouldn't be she was walking in the hallway and getting something to eat.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I thought about the same thing. Let's just say that she had some form of dementia. Where she wasn't aware of her surroundings, this sort of thing. Right. If people are under that kind of care, which, I mentioned about these, communities like this and how it's kind of, there's these inner shells and outer shells and that sort of thing. Right. They're not going to allow her to walk in a food line.
That was what I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, because, you have to be kind of guided. You have this cognitive decline that's going on, and you can't necessarily make choices as well. And can you imagine if you want to get a cup of coffee and you have dementia and you're going to pick up a hot coffee pot and pour you a cup of coffee, things that we take for granted every day. And so it speaks a lot that she was ambulatory. She's walking. She apparently has some level of cognition here. So the reason this is so important is that she's not diminished to the point where maybe you're going to, put her in a suicide capsule, like I'd mentioned at the top end, or choose to give her palliative care like she was in hospice or something. That's not what is going on with her, she's viable. And I think that's very important to remember here, Dave.
And I was looking at the home that she was staying. That it's called Commonwealth Senior Living at Lee Hall. That's where she was living. This is a beautiful home, beautiful. And I mean like a house, not rest home, not nursing home.
Right.
It is active, very active. Actually, you know, they have all kinds of. It's what you explained earlier. In my head when we first started this story, Joe, a couple days ago, looking at it, I thought maybe it was one of those places that was kind of like a hospital on decline, where they had the big nursing beds, and you know, when an individual did get out of their bed to do something, it was to use a walker or a wheelchair to be guided down the hallway. That's what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking about it being a vibrant community of people that are elderly, that are, you know, being together, and it's not like I'm waiting to die. It's like I'm living my life. This is the next chapter. And that's what this place is. It is about living a comfortable life surrounded by friends. And I thought, this is kind of a cool, I'm looking at it going, all right, what's the earliest age I can get in there? I mean, it's looking pretty nice, actually.
Yeah, I know. And again, that goes back to mental stimulation. And by extension, that goes into your quality of life moving forward. Because if you are mentally stimulated to the point where you can still walk, you know, there's the old adage about, what is it? Eat, crap, move. And those three things, if you can do that, then that's going to assure, if you can continue to do those things throughout your life, that simple formula is going to help you. And, you know, if you can do that, then you still remain viable. But I have a hard time trying to understand how she dies in this care facility, being found by a staff member, and we're talking stiff, cold to the touch.
Right.
Yeah. And this is, you know, and how this escalated now into a homicide investigation, Dave.
If I die of natural causes, like I just lay in bed and I go to sleep and don't wake up and I pass in there, how long is it before my body is cold to the touch and I'm becoming rigid?
Good question. And here's a question back at you, and to our friends as well. If you've ever touched a dead body, you know, we use the term cool to the touch or cold to the touch. We can think about things. We can think about things like, say, for instance, that are cold, maybe something that comes out of our refrigerator, or it's cold outside during the colder parts of and you touch something, you understand that that's cold. But Dave, there's some element, for me, it's always been this way, that the coolness of death is unlike any other kind of coolness. And I think that it's the tactile nature of touching a body, and you get, because normally, even with our grandparents, you know, grandparents, in my case, you know, I had grandparents that were always, and a lot of grandparents do this, they complain of being cold all the time. You know, they've got poor circulation.
So cold in here?
Yeah, it's so cold in here. Let's, you know, jack the furnace up to 150 plus hell, and you're sweating. Grandma, I can't take it anymore. But there's that sensitivity with that, you know, you come to, and when you touch the dead, that coolness feels different than any other kind of coolness. So how long does that take? Well, if you think about it this way, for every hour after death, well, the first hour, and people, you know, kind of, they vary on this. They say that you will lose 1.5 to 2 degrees of body temperature for the first hour.
Okay.
And then after that first hour, you're going to bleed off 1 degree until the 12th hour. And it's at the 12th hour you assume what they say is room temperature. So just to touch somebody, our sensibilities as people, you have an expectation when you touch a human body that the body will have some kind of indwelling warmth. There'll be some animation there. It will feel alive. And so when you touch a body, you almost you almost want to retract from it, I think. But it's a measure that we use. Now, granted, cool to the touch, cold to the touch is not a numerical measure.
Right.
And it's hard. Body temperature is one of the hardest things to measure. It's unreliable, first off, because it's dictated by the environment and also internally what's going on with a person. If a person has a fever, for instance, you can throw all of that data out of the window.
Wow.
If somebody has done drugs where they've got like, something like they're on meth or coke or something like that, it's got their metabolism jacked up, it's not going to apply. So that's the thing. But they're saying that she had rigidity. That's something altogether different.
Okay.
That means that she has developed some stiffness. Now, where was the stiffness? If it had extended out to like her elbows, and I'm not thinking it would be fully fixed, but if they were hard to move, then you're talking about a pretty significant gap in time here. Maybe 3 to 4 hours.
Okay.
Hard to say, but this is my question. When the orderly found her, and do they take notes? One of the things that happens if you're in a hospital, and Lord help anybody that's in a hospital right now. I hate being in hospitals, and the nurses always come to visit, and they come at the most inopportune times. They're doing their job, but they're taking nursing notes, and they go back to the station, and they're going to get on their CPU, and they're going to sit there and they're going to type in all of this data about you every time they go into the room: temperature, movement, responsiveness. And guess what? All that stuff is annotated with time markers. In this facility, would they have that? Because that's going to give us a clue as to when she was actually last seen. My understanding is that her daughter and her grandson had actually come to visit her in the house prior to that. That's correct, right?
Right. That is correct.
Dude, let me tell you something. Most of the time, once I hit about 9 p.m., I'm heading to bed at this point in my life. I really am. They didn't find her until like 11 or 11:30.
It was almost 12 o'clock.
Almost midnight. And I've got to figure that at 81, you're wanting to make your way to your comfortable space, get your favorite blanket, lay down in the bed, and drift off into sleep if you can.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, when was the last time the staff actually saw her? Because that's going to be key. And is there videography? Let's go with that.
Yeah.
Of the daughter and the grandson coming down the hallway and then exiting. And how long did it take them to get out of there? And I guarantee you, Dave, that the authorities are all over that information.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
It's kind of interesting to me if this had been an actual nurse that had found the body, and remember, we're talking cold and rigid. A nurse probably would not have, I don't know, if there are no signs of life, the nurses walking around with a stethoscope and that sort of thing, checking for vitals and all of that.
Right.
But I think she was found on the floor, though, which they may have had their suspicions that she fell.
Right.
And if you fall, you've got all kinds of things like impact injuries. And, for the facility, there's a level of liability there too, because if somebody, so you're going to need to call somebody, and that might be, I don't know this for a fact, but they might have something in place that says, okay, if they're found anywhere other than the bed, you got to call 911.
Okay.
So the EMTs roll.
Well, because she's not going to sleep on the floor without a pillow.
No. You're at this age, you're going to want a soft spot to lay down in. Now, you might not be completely comfortable, but you're going to want someplace where you can rest your bones. And on the floor in a care facility it's not at the top of my list. I got to tell you, Dave.
So the police are called at 11:50 p.m. June 30th, and they found her unresponsive. She was pronounced dead at the scene July 1st. Which makes sense. I mean, you're talking about crossing over into the next morning.
Right.
Now, I don't know the entire investigation. We'll find out more. But for those who... People talk to investigators, if you're trying to get away with a crime, you don't talk to police. No. And in this particular case, her death was originally ruled as undetermined.
I think for 3 weeks.
It was days.
3 weeks? It was okay.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to ask you, Joe. What does that actually mean? If, you find an 81-year-old woman on the floor in a nursing home, unresponsive and dead, undetermined, what are my opportunities? Because you mentioned this before, the classifications and type of death and things.
You're peeking underneath the skirts at this point. You've learned something here. The reason we would say undetermined is because we've seen something at the scene and we can't marry it up and make sense out of it. The term that would be used, and I can tell you verbatim, is that these circumstances are, inconsistent with a natural death. That's the way we would frame that kind of intellectually, if we're talking behind the doors at the medical examiner's office in the morning meeting. And I can actually see this in my mind because I've been in this spot before where you're sitting in a room, a bunch of forensic pathologists, and they've got the report from the ME investigator, which, by the way, Virginia has a state medical examiner and they have state ME investigators that kind of break the state down into regions. So if one of these people went out to the scene, if they were summoned out there, perhaps, and they examined her body at that particular time, they're thinking, I don't know. Or it could have gone down like I mentioned earlier. You call the funeral home picks her body up and takes her body back to the funeral home, and they look at it and they say, oh boy, she's got marks on her right now that we don't understand. And so we need to kick this up a notch as far as the investigation. Maybe there was something missed at the scene. And here's the thing. This is why elder abuse and elder deaths like this fly under the radar. You know why, Dave? Because with the aged, there's an expectation of death. I mean, just let that sink in just for a second. And because we put our blinders on intellectually, we don't try to work the problem most of the time. We just say, there's a working assumption, whether people want to admit to it or not. It's a damnable event when you begin to hear that the daughter and the grandson possibly, allegedly, had something to do with her death. Because Dave,
they confessed, Joe.
They did, and here's the thing: the ME has stated that they have discovered evidence of strangulation. And
what evidence do you see with strangulation, Joe?
Well, when you're talking about, and it's funny that they're using the term strangulation. I don't mean funny, ha ha. They're using the term strangulation as it could mean anything. When we think about somebody being strangled, most of the time we think about applying hands to the throat. That's not the case here, according to what has been confessed to, allegedly, at this point in time. Dave, her daughter had Cleo, her mother, her mama, on the floor, held her hands down. Her grandson, Cleo's grandson, took his bag and took the strap that was attached to his bag and used it to strangle, allegedly, his grandmother to death. And while this is going on, according to the police, the daughter, Heather Cummings, uttered these words to her mother: "Just let go. It's for the best."
How long would it take to strangle the life out of an 81-year-old woman?
That's an interesting question, Dave. And I don't think that it would take much. And the reason I say that is that you have two people facilitating this, and the death itself probably would not take that long. I find it very interesting that the grandson, who is alleged to have perpetrated this, did not show up with an actual ligature, like a piece of rope.
Right.
He used something that we refer to as a weapon of convenience, a book bag strap. I mean, and everybody, look, if you've got a book bag or some kind of bag that you carry, consider the strap. It has to be long enough to go around the neck. And I have not envisioned in my mind the action that went into this. Other than this, I had the idea that she was probably supine, which means face up on the floor. The daughter held her hands. She's at the top of Grandma's head, of Cleo's head, holding her wrist down like this, staring down into Cleo's eyes. And the grandson very well may have positioned himself across Grandma's chest with the strap.
Okay.
He might not have actually wrapped it around her neck. But one of the things that we would be looking at the morgue, if this is a strap, this is different than like using a rope. If this is a strap is going to be very textured, and it will have almost a cross-hatching appearance to it. And that's going to leave a mirrored image of it'll be an abraded area, and you can actually see this, Dave. You can actually, if enough force is applied, and remember what we talked about with the elderly, their skin is very fragile, isn't it? And so you would see this mark, almost this cross-hatching mark that you'll see that's in the pattern of a woven strap that will transfer onto her neck. And there'll be little petechiae hemorrhages that are all around that area as well, because the vessels are bursting because of the pressure, the indwelling pressure that's around there. Not to mention her head would probably take on a purple color, and she would have petechiae in her eyes. It's a horrible thing to try to envision, but I hope that they are doing their due diligence to understand the mechanism of her death and how this came about. Because I got to tell you, Dave, this is a brutal, brutal way to die. And, you know, we talk about in life, we talk about who deserves what.
Right.
This lady, certainly, Cleo, did not deserve to die like this. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.